Hello, I am Pastor Becky Keenan, CUFI's Hispanic National Coordinator. I am going to be sharing Chapter 9 of the Israel course, the interwar period from the years 1918 to 1939. And this is from the end of World War I to the beginning of World War II. I want to remind you of key terms that we learned in the previous chapter. We learned about Jewish immigration, the Balfour Declaration, the Faisal-Weizmann Correspondence, and the British Mandate for Palestine. In this chapter, we're going to learn about Jewish life under the British Mandate, the beginnings of Palestinian national identity, the impact of Jewish immigration to Palestine, the ensuing conflict between Arabs and Jews in Palestine, and explain the role of the British Empire in the region during this time frame. So let's do it. Jewish life in Palestine under the British Mandate. The Balfour Declaration in 1917 was essentially an endorsement of a Jewish national home in Palestine. Following this declaration, Jewish population increased by approximately 120,000 Jews that arrived during that decade between 1919 to 1929. Most were at this point fleeing pogroms and anti-Semitic attacks in Eastern Europe. They wanted and they needed a new life. Zionist societies in Eastern Europe therefore provided agricultural training to the Jewish immigrants to start kibbutzim and moshavim, and many of the kibbutz focused on agriculture and developing crops for these growing communities in Palestine. So they had somewhat of a vision. The word kibbutz in Hebrew means gathering or clustering, and these were communal settlements unique to pre-state Israel and the foundation of Israeli society. They fulfilled the Zionist mandate to redeem the land of the Jewish people through merging Jewish values and socialist values, and they placed high importance on work. This work and labor, in this work, women had equal parts. All jobs were open to them, all things were shared and were held in common. And the kibbutz still plays a key role in Israeli life today, but because of global economy and technology, it has evolved somewhat. There have been changes. Now, while the Jews have come to the land, they've come from Eastern Europe, and they are fulfilling this Zionist mandate to redeem the land, there were British and Arab responses to this Jewish immigration and to the work they're doing. And let's go into that because there was conflict. Jewish immigration in the 1930s became more urgent. Now, they escaped the pogroms, they escaped the Eastern Europe persecutions, but now there's another enemy. Nazism is rearing its ugly head, and it gained a foothold in Europe. So now all the more they need to immigrate to Palestine. In the early 1930s, around 175,000 European Jews arrived in Palestine, and the ideal of Zionism began to flourish. Zionism is a national and political movement of Jews and Jewish culture that supports reestablishment of a Jewish homeland as a modern nation state in the historical land of the Jewish people. So it couldn't be in another country, in another continent. It had to be in what was called then Palestine. Jews believed they had a right to national independence and sovereignty as natives of that ancestral land. Therefore, Jewish immigrants began to purchase land from wealthy Arab landholders, and they did it at exorbitant cost. The land was mostly barren, but they wanted it because this was the land of their promise. Jews cultivated the land, began to prosper. At the beginning, they lived in peace side by side with their Arab neighbors, but then this prosperity and the immigration began to create some conflict between them. And this violence was encouraged by a very important figure at this time, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem, who told the Arabs of Palestine the lie that Jews intended to conquer Muslim holy sites. What happened? Persecution broke out, Arab riots in 1920 that happened in Jerusalem and in the Galilee. And we see later on, even in Hebron, and those of you who visited Hebron have seen what happened there. Attacks on Jews under the British also continued. An example of this is this massacre. Finally, what happened was that there was a greater revolt, and that happened for 3 years, from 1936 to 39. The British attempted to quell this rebellion. They disbanded the Arab Higher Committee that was the central political organ of the Arab Palestinians under the British mandate. This Mufti, the Grand Mufti, he fled to Germany, Nazi Germany, and he pledged his support to Hitler. So we know that he espoused those ideals, the final solution, which was extermination of all Jews around the world. In this era, we see the beginnings of Arab Palestinian nationalism, that identity. But I want to say it was very sad that this did not get formulated out of pride or achievement or even genuine unity among the tribal peoples that lived, the tribal delineations in the land at the time, but rather antipathy towards an opposition of the Jewish people. So it wasn't because they were creating something, it was because they were reacting to something. And the Arabs of Palestine, up until this time, like I said, they were organized along familial and tribal tribes. They did not have an understanding of themselves as anything separate as Palestinians. No, they were Arabs like any other Arab in the world. The British mandate, the League of Nations mandated Britain to be responsible to steward the creation of this Jewish national homeland. But the British also, at the beginning, they started with the Balfour Declaration, like I mentioned, wanting them to come to their ancestral land. But then the issue of oil came in. They wanted the oil reserves throughout the Middle East. So they wanted to appease the Arabs and maintain relationships with them. So what happened was the Arab revolts had an effect on the British mandate and their policies, and they limited Jewish immigration to Palestine. They also restricted land sales to Jews at this time, and by 1921, the British had partitioned the land for Jewish national home into two different states. They gave the Jews 77% of the land. The Arabs 77% of the land. It was called Transjordan, and 23% to the Jews. The Jews said yes, the Arabs said no, and then the British mandate, they came to the conclusion that this idea was no longer tenable. Riots continued until there was a 6-month long Arab general strike, which prompted the British government to appoint a commission. This is called the Peel Commission, after Lord Peel, who headed it. This was in 1937, and they recommended partitioning the land with 80% now, an increase to the Arabs, 80% to the Arab state, 20% to the Jewish state. The British would have then control of the central region of Palestine from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, with the remaining land divided amongst Jews and Arabs. There were very strict enforcements of Jewish immigration. The Jews in Palestine were not pleased, but again, they accepted. Arabs violently opposed it. And then Arabs started attacking not just the Jewish communities with increased force, but also the British, their communities and whatnot. This partition plan proposed by the Peel Commission never did materialize. And I want to end with a quote, and I want you to notice the year. This is November 25th. This is pre-Holocaust. November 25th, 1936. Testifying before this commission, the Peel, P-E-E-L, Peel Commission, Chaim Weizmann said that there are in Europe 6 million Jews for whom the world is divided into places where they cannot live and places where they cannot enter. This visionary said that they needed to be able to emigrate to Palestine, that they needed to be able to escape Europe as Nazism was rising, and no one listened. Thank you.